Welcome back to Ring of Fire. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with Sam Cedar and Mike Papantonio. During his campaign, Mitt Romney has worked tirelessly to convince the American people that President Obama handled the bailout of the auto industry in the worst possible way. But what Mitt doesn't want the public to know is that he and his family personally benefited from the bailout to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. They were able to secure millions of dollars for themselves, from the federal government, for their investments in Detroit. And actually, their donors, some of their principal donors, received billions of dollars from the bailout. Joining me now to tell the story of Mitt Romney's bailout bonanza is our old friend, Greg Palast, author of the new book, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. How are you, Greg?
Pretty good. I wish I were as good as the Romneys. I obviously Obama screwed up the auto bailout because Mitt Romney's top donors, just three of his top donors, made $4.2 billion, and Romney himself made, at the minimum, $15.3 million, and likely $115 million. And that's the last chapter of the book, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. But it's also the cover of The Nation magazine this month. And by the way, just so you know, Romney's campaign confirmed that he made the money.
In Romney's defense, I keep hearing him say that all of his money is now in a blind trust. So did he actually know this was happening?
Bobby, he's CEO. He was CEO of a hedge fund. And if Greg Palast can get through the so-called blind trust, obviously the CEO of a hedge fund can too. And not only has, but did. I call it a blonde trust. I actually got a call by several lawyers after I put the story in The Nation at the back of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits on the cover, that in fact it's not a blind trust. He calls it a blind trust. You could call it the Ann Romney Doggy Trust. I call it the blonde trust now because it's not a federally approved blind trust. You cannot make $115 million. You have to understand that's what this guy pulled in, $115 million. Off of what is 100% of that came from the U.S. Treasury. If you have that, it's not against the law, please understand, but the ethics in government law requires you to disclose it unless, for some reason, it was put in a federally approved blind trust where you absolutely would have no idea that the money was invested there. He did not do that. He said if he's elected, he'll do that. Right now, it's in something he calls a blind trust. In Ann Romney's name, but he gets all the details of the investments right at he gets an audited statement with all the details of the investments is number one. He files his tax forms, and because of the way he structured it, he knows exactly where his money came from. Exactly. That's why he won't release the 2000.
You know, one of the most disturbing parts of the story to me, the most disturbing, was his relationship with Paul Singer, who you and I have talked about a lot on this show before. Paul Singer is one of the worst pirates today in capitalism.
He just stole a pirate ship from the Argentine Navy. He seized on the high ships, or actually off the coast of Africa, an old pirate frigate, which is used as kind of a PR gimmick by the Argentine Navy. They sail around in it with U.S. sailors, by the way. Luckily, there weren't any on, but there are now basically 115 sailor hostages on a old pirate ship from Argentina, which is now in the control of Paul Singer. But I should note that a piece of it, maybe the parrot on the captain's shoulder, is owned by Mitt Romney, who is his silent partner.
Well, Steve Ratner, who was charged with orchestrating the auto bailouts for the Obama administration, called Singer and his partners because they were holding up the entire auto bailout so that they could make billions of dollars for their small company, which sat in a key position. The company was called Delphi, and it was the auto parts manufacturer for General Motors that had been spun off a few years before, but without saving Delphi, you couldn't save the auto company, so that they really kind of were standing on the throat of the entire auto bailout, and they used their power ruthlessly. Steve Ratner, who was managing the auto bailouts for the Obama administration, was really shocked by their lack of patriotism, by their bad behavior, and he called it, quote, extortion demands by the Barbary pirates. So Paul Singer is a pirate in virtually every way. One of the things that the story is so sleazy, what they did from beginning to end, and the transactions, the sleazy transactions between Bain Capital and Delphi, which was Paul Singer's firm, which Romney owned a piece of, and then how they then transferred 100,000 workers offshore so that they used that bailout money to save 25,000 jobs in Detroit, but they stripped those jobs of their unions, they stripped them of their pensions, and they took the bulk of their workers, 100,000 workers, and moved them offshore to China. And that's what they did. That's what they did with the bailout money. And, it's really striking when you see Mitt Romney in these debates talking about, how he would have saved Detroit. And you can see exactly what he did through this process that you've outlined so meticulously.
By the way, let me give you the very sad punchline, because I just got a call from Michael Moore, whose dad worked at the Delphi plant in Flint. Mitt Romney's syndicate. Okay, let me give you the story in about 2 sentences so people can follow. This is from the last chapter of Billionaires and Ballot Bandits. The auto parts division of General Motors was spun off, went bankrupt, and a Vulture fund led by Paul the Vulture Singer and his silent partner, Mitt Romney, took over the parts company. They used Flim Flam to buy up the entire auto parts company, GM, for just 67 cents a share. They then told, and this is a quote from Romney's group, they told the U.S. Treasury and GM, give us our money or, quote, and this is a quote, we will shut you down. They had found out that they'd actually hired GM parts purchasers. It was like the industrial espionage, and found out that GM had a zero inventory of steering wheels and steering columns. They said, your cars will look funny without the steering columns. So they said, we will shut you down. Not put GM in bankruptcy, but liquidate GM, completely demolish GM, unless you give us our money. They got $12.9 billion from the U.S. government, because otherwise the auto bailout would have vanished, would have evaporated. They got $12.9 billion. Once they got that money, the shares are worth $22. They sold some shares at $22. That's a 3,200% profit. Then they got the government to take over their pensions. We pay the pensions for the Delphi workers, and they
they stiffed their workers for $7 billion worth of pensions, and
we paid $6, and
we had to pay for it.
Yes, and here's the terrible punchline. All 25,200 UAW jobs, every single one, was sent to China. They took 25,200 jobs here, and they created 25,800 jobs in China. They closed 28 of 29 auto parts plants. Delphi still is the main supplier of parts to General Motors. Almost all those parts were made in Michigan and Ohio. Today, virtually every part is made in China. It was a shift done in just a couple of years, and because of that, because they got rid of the UAW contracts and the workers, because they didn't have to even pay them their pensions or severance or their health insurance, by the way, the stock is now up to $30 a share. That's a 4,500% profit for Paul the Vulture Singer and the Romneys. Again, I just want to note, it's very important that the Romney campaign has sent us an email saying that our figures are not inaccurate, so it's somewhere between 15 and 115 million for the Romneys, but that it's Obama's fault, by the way.
Right, and I want to get back to that in a minute, because that's the last insult, that the Romneys were the silent partners in robbing the American people of billions of dollars during the auto bailout, taking the jobs, sending them overseas, and then, in the end, on advertisements today being played in Detroit, they are blaming Barack Obama for the loss of those pensions. We're back on Ring of Fire. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Right now I'm talking with Greg Palast, author of the new book, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, which I wrote one chapter of and the introduction, and which is now on the top of the New York Times bestseller list. And I'm talking to Greg about the last chapter of his book, which has this extraordinary disclosure, which he learned through really top-rate investigative reporting, and which is now the cover story of the Nation's magazine, how the Romney family, how Mitt Romney, acting as a silent partner to Vulture capitalist Paul Singer, was able to get for him and his friends billions of dollars from the auto bailout TARP, from Obama's auto bailout TARP, and for a small company that was critical to creating parts for General Motors, they threatened to destroy the entire automobile industry, the entire General Motors company, unless they got these billions of dollars. Steve Ratner, who was orchestrating the bailout, called them the Barbary Pirates. And then they took all the jobs, or most of those jobs. They stripped every job of its union protection. They stripped them of their pensions, and they sent the bulk of those jobs, 3/4 of them, overseas to China. And now, today, there are ads being run by Romney's campaign, by his associate super PACs in the state of Michigan, which they show workers from those companies blaming Barack Obama for stripping them of their pensions, when it was really Mitt Romney and Paul Singer who stripped them of their pensions and their union protection and shipped their jobs overseas.
Yes, Bobby, I should note, in the Nation article, in the book, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, I say, look, it is Mitt Romney and his Vulture buddy, Paul Singer, and a billionaire named Dan Loeb, who are proud to say, we don't have these pension obligations anymore. They refused to, you have to understand, Bobby, they stopped the pensions unilaterally, which they could do because Delphi was technically in bankruptcy court, so they could stop paying the pensions. The federal government ended up taking over the pension funds you and I pay and every taxpayer pays for the pensions of the Delphi workers. Some of the Delphi workers don't get all their pension because once the government takes over, the Republicans, by the way, put a limit on how much workers can get from the government if their pensions fail. It's an insurance program. So the Republicans put a limit on how much the Delphi workers could get. Paul Singer and Mitt Romney refused to pay those pensions. And I should say, Bobby, that General Motors, which had no obligation to pay the Delphi worker pensions for the union workers, General Motors said, we will pay. General Motors was in bankruptcy, didn't have the money, and General Motors owners and executives said, we are obligated to those union workers. We had an agreement. And so the UAW had an agreement. By the way, this is a good reason to join a union, isn't it? Because the UAW had an agreement, which they did not have to honor, but General Motors did it. Romney and his partners did not, and they had, it's unbelievable. They kill the pensions unilaterally and blame Obama for doing nothing more than saving all he could that was allowed by law. And it is unbelievable. And I'm just, frankly.
And then they used some of those profits to buy a bunch of foreign parts companies.
Yes,
from Bain Capital.
Yeah. So because to move 25,000 jobs to China like almost instantly, you have to get parts plants that are already in business in China. So they bought them from Bain because Bain left America a long time ago. And then in the last debate, Romney said, I would do nothing to harm. Because Obama brought this up obliquely, because his campaign, when they read our article, freaked out. And they brought it up, Obama, obliquely to Romney about investing in moving jobs to China. He said, I would never do anything to harm the auto industry. I'm a son of Detroit. He's a son of Bain. Okay, I'm sure his daddy is not all that happy looking down on this, seriously. And who was a man, I disagree with his politics, but a decent man, okay? And the evil thing here, Bob, is that each of these three billionaires, who together got $4.2 billion, each one gave $1 million back to the Romney campaign. And then they've used that money. That money has now gone to Karl Rove for his activities in making sure that Mr. Romney, Delphi, China, takes the White House.
So there's two more insults to the injuries in this case. One of them are the advertisements that I talked about that are now going on in Michigan, in which they have hoodwinked these workers from the plants who didn't understand who just didn't understand the nature of these transactions and didn't understand that it was Mitt Romney who was screwing them, not Barack Obama. They have them on TV saying Barack Obama stole my pension. But in addition to that, Delphi, the company that Mitt Romney is a silent partner in, has now moved from Detroit, from Michigan, to the Isle of Jersey off of England, so it won't have to pay U.S. taxes. This is the level of Mitt Romney's patriotism.
Mitt Romney's. The reason we don't know exactly how much money Romney made, whether it was 15 is the minimum, more likely 115 million, which he doesn't deny. He would have probably said, "Oh my God, that's way too much." 115 million. We don't know because he doesn't pay taxes on it because they've moved the company from Troy, Michigan to a rock in the middle of the English Channel called the Isle of Jersey, which is a notorious tax haven, and none of the profits get taxed. However, if Romney is elected president, he has said that companies which have foreign profits from China kept offshore, they will move them back to the U.S. untaxed. So if Romney's elected president, he'll take his profits from the auto parts operation in China that he owns, where the profits are kept in the English Channel. He will now bring them back. If he becomes president, does what he says, he'll move them back to the USA, tax-free. And, I mean, I have to tell you, I've done a lot of weird investigations, Bobby. This is truly one of the weirdest, and frankly, I'm actually surprised that Romney didn't deny it. In fact, they actually said they blamed it on Obama that he made money. They said if it weren't for Obama, he wouldn't have made the money. That's what his campaign told us. Obama did the bailout, so basically they say Obama threw the money out the window and Romney caught it. He's a smart businessman.
Greg Palast is the author of the new bestseller, Billionaires and Ballot Bandits, How to Steal an Election in the 9 Easy Steps. He's one of the top investigative journalists in our country today, and thank you again, Greg, for lifting up the rocks and exposing the dirt underneath Mitt Romney's money pile. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Bobby.